Welcome, powerful people, to your Nonprofit Power podcast. We are live today with an amazing guest talking about such an important strategy of building a social movement of support for your mission. So I can't wait to introduce our guest, Bethany Snyder. You know the drill here at Nonprofit Power, where we dig in and get real about all things nonprofit leadership and how you can create more money, more mission, and more peace of mind. So important to leading and running an organization and a movement. We want to support you along your journey to making big change in this world. I'm Amy Fazio, nonprofit growth strategist and speaker, and the creator of the Magnify Your Mission system, where we help nonprofit leaders build the plan and the confidence to cut through the busy work, focus on the power moves, and accelerate or fast track your mission. We want to help you do that without the burnout, because the burnout problem in the nonprofit sector is real. So today's topic of advocacy for the win, building out your advocacy plan, is all about finding a more simple, straightforward way to strengthen your voice and make everything easier, especially fundraising. So join me in welcoming to the stage Bethany Snyder.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Welcome, Bethany of Snyder Strategies, which is
Mhm.
your consulting firm. We're so excited to have you here. We love talking community building, Bethany, which we know is really code for building your group of supporters, your donors, your advocates, your funders, your those that believe in your mission. We call it community building. We know the power tool is advocacy to do that.
Mhm.
We are really excited to dig in with you today and learn more about the important work you're doing all across the country, really. Um, so tell us a little bit about yourself, Bethany. Tell us how you came to love and become passionate about advocacy. Where did that all start?
Well, that's fascinating. I get this question a lot because, growing up, I don't think I heard the term advocacy. I didn't know that this was a job that you could do as an adult. But I look back at in high school, I was always really passionate about social issues. I got my feet wet in kind of social issues or social justice issues through feminism. Um, and I realized, in my circle of friends and in my groups, I was always that social director. I was the person who was organizing people, even just to go like to a movie. I wasn't organizing people in social movements back then, but just getting, what do we all want to do? How do we get there together?
Yeah.
Um,
How do we get
and then
people
when
fired up and revved up and on the same page? Yep.
Exactly. And so when I moved, I went to college. I got my degrees in sociology and women's studies, which of course my parents thought I was going to live in their basement for the rest of my life. But while I was there, I was really exposed to in the sociology program was like, yes, I always knew I wanted to help people, but I knew that my role wasn't, I knew could have greater impact just helping people one-on-one. And that's when I was introduced to policy as a solution to that. How can we change the laws that impact people on the ground? We can end homelessness by addressing, housing policy. We can end hunger by changing the policies around our food systems. We can end, lack of access to healthcare by changing the policies that drive our healthcare system. And so that really appealed to me. So that's how I really got jazzed up and excited about it.
I love how you talk about power with so much
Mhm.
comfort and confidence and
Mhm.
clarity. And man, if there's one legacy impact I can leave with people I work with or just in my lifetime is own your power, man. Know what it
Yes.
is and own the
Yes.
power.
Yes.
And that's what I hear you saying. It's like you just
Mhm.
identifying where can I spend my time to make
Mhm.
the biggest impact and difference. That's what nonprofit leaders really are charged with doing in large part, right?
Absolutely. I was actually just on a call with some, food bank leaders, and we're talking about some upcoming August recess visits with senators. And I remember saying, like, whatever the agenda, whatever, I told them, stay away from stats and statistics. A fact sheet never changed anyone's mind.
Yeah.
But, leave that behind because their staff need that. But I said, don't be afraid to remind these senators they have the power to end hunger in Iowa. And you have the power to encourage them to do that. You don't need to be rude. You don't need to be antagonistic, but just remind them you have the ability to improve people's lives across Iowa. I live in Iowa, so that's why I'm going to reference Iowa a lot. Yes, I remember when I first started this work, to me, the word power is not negative.
Mhm.
And maybe it's because I'm part of the LGBTQ community and we have really had to identify our power. And if we didn't step up, we would not have the equality and laws that we have today if LGBTQ people did not step up and realize their power. But I've realized when I do workshops and trainings and talk to clients, they're like, people are really uncomfortable about talking about power. Um,
Yes.
and I still can't relate to that because it's hard because I'm like, that is your greatest power as a nonprofit. Your greatest, I saw talk about the 3 superpowers of nonprofits, if you don't mind me diving in.
Yeah.
But one of them is your subject matter expertise. You have more when you are talking to lawmakers, I guarantee, have more expertise about that topic than they do. And that's, you got to remember that they're in charge of lots of different issues all over the place. You definitely know your topic better than the person you're talking to. Subject matter expertise, access to localized data.
Mm.
You know your communities better than anyone else. And then third, is access
Mhm.
to people with lived experience and stories. But then I say our kryptonite is your access to people. Corporations don't have access to the people like nonprofits do. And that's really where your power lies.
You're a trusted gatekeeper, and in fact, it's part of your responsibility as a
Yes.
community leader and nonprofit.
Yes.
They're not just your ATM machine, they're your collective um, partners in driving that change, that your collective voice, right? It's a partnership. And I think that we do a disservice to our missions and to our communities that we're serving when
Mhm.
we don't leverage the power of the people that we represent.
Absolutely. I talk about this again. I do lots of workshops and trainings on this. And so I just want to say I'm a former United States Senate staffer. So
Okay.
I have sat across the table from hundreds of lobbyists and advocates just like you. And oh my gosh, I just really just lost my train of thought, but it will come back to me.
What is that like? Yeah, when you're sitting in front of a nonprofit leader who's obviously so passionate and they might
Yes.
yeah, what are
But
you hearing when you're at that side of the table?
well, what I'm very always surprised by is again a Senate staffer or a lawmaker staff or even a lawmaker. Our knowledge is a mile wide and an inch deep. I can only know. I mean, I was in charge of my portfolio included healthcare, seniors, children, nutrition, LGBTQ, and then I got added on arts later on. I can't know everything.
A
My
lot.
job as a staffer is to know the people to know the experts, to know the people I can call. And I want nonprofits to be the ones that people call, those staffers and lawmakers call. So I show a chart of the amount of corporate lobbying dollars that has happened over the last 3 decades and has gone from like, I'll just tell you the chart looks like this. That's what you need to know. It doesn't need,
I don't
and
think I can see that chart.
yeah, it doesn't matter what the numbers are. It's just terrible. And I say, I actually think, and this gets a little bit like heady, but I actually think the health and vitality of our democracy rests on nonprofits being engaged. So
Yeah.
again, as a nonprofit, as a United States Senate staffer or as a lawmaker, if a bill comes in front of me that talks about solutions for diabetes or different treatments or diabetes prevention programs, and I need to figure out, is this something I want my boss to support? Is this going to be good for our community, our state, what have you? You know that farmer rep has been in my office at least once that week. You know that I have them on speed dial. You
Mhm.
know that I have access to them. But do you think that our democracy and policies are best made just by corporate and moneyed entities being asked? No. I want to know I want nonprofits to be those people on the other side of the line that are closest to the people impacted by those policies who can say, I know how this will impact people experiencing diabetes in my community. So that is really where I see it. I see it about the health of our democracy. I don't want it being made by just people who have moneyed interests. I want it to be
Yeah,
made by people who are really closest to the center of that policy.
who are on the ground. And I love your conversation about access because
Mhm.
nonprofit leaders have the unique role, and it's up to us to use
Mhm.
the power of being a trusted, um, neutral, meaning
Mhm.
influenced by money or resources, voice for the people we represent. So if we're not owning that power, I'm telling you, everything else is harder. Everything, right?
Yes.
Fundraising, getting the word out, getting
Mhm.
partners on board. You want people knocking on your door, You don't want to be, running around the community, what I like to say,
Yeah.
pounding the pavement,
Yeah.
chasing people
Absolutely.
down to get involved. If that's how you're feeling about growing your audience and your mission, you're not harnessing the power of advocacy, because you are I love when I talk to people, especially young professionals who are trying to figure
Mm-hmm.
out a job. The first thing I say is, know you're a hot commodity. Like, please
Mm-hmm.
sit with that for a minute. There are people
Mm-hmm.
dying to get access to you and your information.
Yes.
You got to flip the script and start from that area of believing, because nobody's going to treat you better or believe in you better than you believe in yourself. So I
Absolutely.
love those three superpowers
Mm-hmm.
around you owning your credibility and your expertise. I know
Yes.
peers who go into meetings nervous. I'm like, you're nervous. They should be nervous. You're the expert in housing. You're the expert in rare diseases. You're
Absolutely.
the expert in social justice. And then with that mindset, Bethany, it's that what you said was you're really giving them an opportunity to do their job better. I like to think of it as,
Mm-hmm.
we got it all ready for you. You can come in,
Mm-hmm.
look like the
Mm-hmm.
superhero situation. If you get the job done, you're welcome to join us if you'd like. But it's up to them to do the right thing. We provide the
Absolutely.
opportunity, right?
And to your point where you said, you said something that triggered this idea that I talk to my clients a lot about. Like, if you're not talking to them, hundreds of other people are. It doesn't mean that they're not getting information from people. And is that the right information? Is it the correct information? I don't know.
Is
But
it
I
better than
also want,
the information you got? Yeah. Sorry.
absolutely. And what I want my folks to think about is, this is a very common advocacy saying, but I want you at the table, not on the menu. And if you're at the table, you're less likely to be on the menu. And if you are on the menu, you'll see it. I have so many nonprofits whose state budget funding got cut or reduced, and they didn't know anything about it. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
if you're
you should.
that, that's a misstep. It is.
Yes, absolutely. I want you at the table and I'm not on the menu. And it's sometimes and by being at the table, that's just finding out. When people ask, what's one step we should take to get involved in advocacy? I always say, and please, I want someone to reach out to me and tell me this. I bet there's already someone in your community working on similar issues to you. If you're feeding the homeless, or if you're feeding the hungry, housing the homeless, access to healthcare, mental health care, climate justice, immigration justice, I guarantee, even if you're like a feline rescue organization, there are other people who are committed to that. Do they already have a coalition? Are they already talking to each other? Go find them first. Find out if something's already happening and say, can I sit in at your coalition? Can I come to a meeting? Do you have a sign-on letter? That is like the easiest, I think, step to take, is just go and find out who's already convening the tables and go ask to be at it.
I love that. It's such an important step. Know who's out there, get to know them, know what you do better, know what they do better,
Mm-hmm.
really understand what you can get
Yeah.
plugged into. I think that's super important. I talk a lot about raising money, Bethany. I love
Yes.
money because I think money is
Mm-hmm.
the byproduct of doing everything
Mm-hmm.
else really well. So it's not money for the money's sake, but it's that it's a great measure if our message,
Mm-hmm.
our community is engaged, right? And I like to say raising money for overhead is often a pain point for
Mm.
leaders. I will tell you what is some really, I have a couple of ideas around how to raise money for overhead. And one of them is a task force or a coalition, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's something you need to have put together. It is not a direct program or service. It requires a lot of administrative and leadership support to craft a white
Mm-hmm.
paper or whatever result that task force has. But advocacy is such an important focus of what that could look like.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And another thing I think that people forget about advocacy is, of course, if you do great advocacy, you're going to pass laws and make people's lives better. But I think people forget, and nonprofit leaders don't realize, that advocacy does improve your bottom line. So I encourage folks to think about advocacy not just as a tool to passing good policies, but also as a stakeholder engagement tool. It's another way to bring people closer to your mission. I'm sure, Amy, you hear all the time, we just keep going back to our donors and asking them for money. We keep asking them for money.
Same people.
Yes. Well, a great way to engage people and bring them closer to your mission is engage them in advocacy. Ask them to reach out to their lawmaker about a specific issue. And we know their stats. I haven't updated them lately, and people don't actually do research on them, but M&R did a benchmarking where it showed Advocacy messages are opened 4 times higher than fundraising messages.
Mhm.
An advocate engaged in a donor engaged in advocacy gives 60% more than a donor not engaged in advocacy. And that what that tells me is a person engaged in your mission gives more than person not engaged in your mission. Like, right? I mean, that's what.
Simply put, yeah.
Yeah. And advocates give 7 times more than other kinds of donors.
Activism
So
is in their DNA. It's in their,
yes,
yeah.
exactly. And if I know for me, once I give to an organization because I see they're doing a great advocacy thing, they're doing advocacy well, I'm much more likely to keep giving to that organization, maybe give to them in different ways and other ways as well. So I think just letting folks know advocacy is not just this thing out there that's going to cost you money. It shouldn't, because it should be meeting your mission more effectively if you do it right. But B, you can use it to fundraise and to bring your donors and volunteers and supporters closer to your organization.
Yeah, I love that. For me, community building is one of the 5 steps of the Magnify Your Mission system. We throw that term around a lot, engaging your community.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been like you around for a minute, right? We've been in the sector
Mm-hmm.
for a few years.
Yeah.
I think we should add up our combined years. And but what does it really mean to engage your community? And the most important thing you can do for your fundraising is the things you do before your fundraiser. It's that relationship building
Mm-hmm.
with your community. And we can wait till the annual event to see somebody to build that relationship,
Mm-hmm.
or we can be connecting with them digitally and online with meaningful steps they can take
Mm-hmm.
to be part of this vision, right? They want to be part of a winning change agency. And when you can put yourself out there that we're the experts, we're on the front line,
Mm-hmm.
we have a huge collective voice, and we know what to do with it, you're raising the confidence of your donors. I think that's what you're saying,
Absolutely.
Bethany.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think also another thing is there are lots of myths around advocacy in the nonprofit sector, and a lot of nonprofit leaders believe those myths, which always surprises me. It shouldn't these days, because I don't know why. I've been doing this for so long. But like an organization you would think would be engaged in advocacy, I've heard come out of their mouths, we can't do advocacy. And I always ask, like, oh, is that because some kind of grant you have?
Yeah.
I'm like, what? Can you tell me more about that? What is it? And then they say, well, because nonprofits can't do advocacy. I'm like, that and I try to be as gentle as possible. I'm not. That's actually incorrect. That's false. You can do advocacy. Of course, you have to pay attention to how much you spend on it, and don't stay away from elections. Right? There's certain rules, but you absolutely can be engaged in advocacy. And by not engaged in advocacy, you're just leaving so much on the table.
So much on the table.
Yeah.
You're making things so much harder for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting, and I love that. I always equate that to HIPAA. I like you. I spent some time in mental health industry, behavioral health industry, and it's such the flag of resistance when it's like, hey, I wonder if we could figure this out, and it's no, we can't do it. HIPAA can't do it. Can't do it. And while I respect HIPAA and the safety it provides, it can't be the excuse of not moving forward. I'd say same thing with not understanding advocacy.
Absolutely. That is a great analogy.
When you're in the nonprofit field, you are an advocate. So Bethany, I guess I should have started with this question. In the most simplest way, how do you define advocacy?
That's great. That's another question I get, because there are different sectors, like definitely in the disability sector, where we have self-advocacy and self-advocates, and really just standing up for yourself, being a health advocate, asking for what you need, knowing the right questions to ask your physician, et cetera. But how I see it is really I really focus on legislative advocacy and policy advocacy. And I see it as leveraging I used to say building your power. I think you already have power. You need to leveraging your power, finding your power, so you can change the laws and policies that ultimately will impact your nonprofit. Whether that's, I always say I help nonprofits build their power so they can pass good policies and stop bad ones. Really, it's about and that's I can go.
It's a level of tackling. So I call it the 4 layers of messaging for different reasons you give, right? Your programs and your services are handling the now, right?
Yes.
It's addressing the immediate need. It's your strategy to drive the big change. But the big change is often much more connected to a systems disruption. You're trying to
Absolutely.
disrupt a current system that's creating a situation of homelessness or food scarcity or social
Mm-hmm.
injustice
Mm-hmm.
while you're serving the immediate need. So to keep a foot in that big vision of the real world that you want to see in the future,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to need some language, some strategy of what you're doing to educate people, to inform people, to encourage people to change policy, to strengthen people's voice, to demand change. You know what I think is a really interesting example of this lately, Bethany? And I just saw an article about the ice bucket challenge. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So it started as a fundraising appeal that took off, became viral.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you happened to see in the news recently, they just passed very experimental, controversial medication, um,
Mm-hmm.
which, there's no way that that would have moved through the FDA,
Mm-hmm.
based on the data they had. But because of the immense pressure of that community, and probably big thanks to that ASL Ice Bucket Challenge,
Yeah.
they were able to advocate their way to let's get this treatment in the bodies of people to extend lives, even when we don't know all of the potential negative outcomes of it.
Mm-hmm.
Patients are saying we need it now, and they got it. And I just think that's an incredible example of how else would they have gotten that done.
Absolutely. So I started my career working at the American Heart Association as my first job after grad school. And I remember, the first week, I tell this story a lot, and some of my old bosses have heard it. But one of my goals was I had to sign up, get people to be engaged in our grassroots network. And so this is an organization that, touts having 1 million walkers in their state. And so I said, okay, so um, how do you typically do that? And they're like, well, you go to health fairs and community fairs and science fairs and wellness fairs. And I was like, well, what about those 1 million walkers? You should have do you have a 1 million? Are they've all been asked? I was like, and they're like, oh no, that's so siloed. And so I remember my first task, I said, I don't need to leave this building. I don't need to leave this building to get grassroots network, people to join our grassroots network. I just need to make best friends with the fundraisers. And so I had to really change my thinking when I talked to them. And that was one of the things I'd say. So after a few years, we passed some big federal, NIH funding. And I said, I brought in like $60 million to the state. Like, how much did you bring in? But I didn't say it like that. Sometimes I did because I was close friends with them. But anyway, by that time, but it was like thinking more expansively about the impact you're having. And like, it's not just about how much money we're bringing into our doors of our organization, how much are we contributing to our sector.
Yeah, it's almost like you're not thinking about the money. The money is actually going to come as a result of the messaging.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not to overwhelm people, but you're already doing this. You're
Yes.
already there. You just need help to see that it's often just spotlighting and showcasing what you're already doing
Yes.
in the world of advocacy. Can you give us some examples of
Mhm.
what nonprofits might already be doing that are
Yes.
steps in advocacy? Is anything come to? I'm trying to think of my clients. Anything come to mind?
Well, I say the biggest thing that I think that is already sitting right in front of every single nonprofit is their board of directors. Again, I guarantee that no matter what your nonprofit is, I don't care if you're a feline rescue nonprofit or mental health I don't know why I pick on feline rescues, but because there's always
Not my
cat rescue.
rescues. I had yes, no.
But
It's path to ultimate social justice.
exactly, that's why. I guarantee that your maybe not all your board members, but your board members are politically connected. They gave, and your donors. I used to have the numbers that I don't know, $60 zillion were spent on the last election. I guarantee that your donors and your board members gave to candidates. And many of them might already have relationships with those candidates. By you not asking, you'll never know. And the greatest thing about board members and lawmakers is they both have egos and love to tell you who they know. And so you're just not leveraging that relationship that already exists, that you may be able to turn into something that's really cool, that may be able to change that, ordinance around, animal safety.
Yeah.
anyway, so that's one big thing, is just talking to your board about who are the folks you're connected to in your community. Do you already have relationships with these people?
And I think because I work a lot with board and governance. In fact, we have a webinar next week, Unleash Your Board Superpowers,
Mm-hmm.
is, going in and saying, who do you know, or why didn't you give yet, is different
Mm-hmm.
than, we want to really focus. The strategic plan calls for relationships with elected officials. Does
Mm-hmm.
anyone know them or have donated to them? I think that's
Mm-hmm.
a great question, because they think, oh, I only gave $50. Believe me, they know your name there and they'll take your
Yeah,
call.
absolutely. Yeah. No,
Elected officials should be in your database. I mean, in the
yes.
strategic plan, we'll actually, I'll have the group think about how many
Mm-hmm.
officials and staffers are in your database and
Mm-hmm.
grow that number. Because if they're not there, they're not part of your community.
Well, and I think that's a good segue to talk a little bit about staff. I know that most state legislatures don't have professional staff, but many do. But definitely at the federal level, and even city councils have aides and mayors have aides. And so that's one thing. I think people get really sad when they don't get to talk to the lawmaker, and they're like, "Oh, we're just talking to staff." Now, obviously, I have a very strong viewpoint of this as a former staff.
Get stuff done. Yeah.
We are the one. Actually, when I was prepping this organization this morning for their meeting with the senators are supposed to be there, and I said, actually, in my head, I didn't say it out loud, but in my head, I was like a little bit disappointed because we're not going to be able to get to like a lot of the things I want to get to as a staff person, because we're going to have to do the whole, rigmarole with this senator there. But I was like, oh, I can always follow up with the staff later and have that real conversation, right? But the staff are gatekeepers. If they are the ones, the bills come across my desk and say, Bethany, how should I vote on this? I'm writing the memo anyway to meet with them. So the more I know about you and the more I know about your organization, the better that memo is going to be, the better the prep is going to be, the better the meeting is going to be. So I always say, make best friends with the staffers. That's literally, especially,
Listen,
I worked in
now in life, you want the people in the mailroom, the administrative assistant,
the scheduler.
These are the people who make the world go round, folks. So in fundraising, do not. The secretaries of corporations you're trying to get sponsorships from, these are the people, these are the gatekeepers.
Absolutely. And that's another reason why I would say don't be mean to staff. Like, when I talk, I have lots of different, tips about working with lawmakers. So I'm part of the LGBTQ community, and I am the board chair of our state LGBTQ organization called One Iowa Action. And so believe me, there are some lawmakers I do not want to talk to. Like, it's hard. I mean, we should talk about trauma-informed advocacy. But I just recognize that and I say, I should not talk to this lawmaker. I have too much happening. But also when I am talking to some lawmakers, I just remember we're at work. I'm just at work. I need to remember that they're just at work, even though this really impacts my life, does not impact their life. And I think, that's a kind of not as good a example, because that really is a very touchy issue for me. But think about food insecurity or housing. Your whole goal is just to build rapport and see them as a trusted source.
Yeah. And I often talk to my clients around this notion of Q-tip, right? Quit taking it personally.
Oh, yeah.
And what I mean is not that it's not personal to us, but
Mm-hmm.
the fact is they are just doing a job. So if we can craft our message in the sense that we're here to help you do your job better, to look good, to get reelected, to do whatever you need to do, we're going to give you the pathway to do the right thing. It's up to you to take the steps down that path, but we're here to partner with you, provide you the information and access to the community if that's what you choose to do. You really need to think about it as you're providing them an exceptional opportunity. And message it accordingly, but message it in a way of why they care, not why you care.
Absolutely.
People don't take action. They don't give money for the reasons you want them to. They only do it for the reasons they want to. As a leader, your messaging has to meet them where they're at. You don't jam your message down their throat. It's just not how it works.
Absolutely. And just to go back to that story I was talking about prepping for this Senate recess meeting next week, I said I want to spend. We have. I thought we had 30 minutes. Now we have 20 minutes. So I have to redo the agenda. But I want to spend 5 minutes of us talking, and I want to spend the rest of the 15 minutes of them talking, because unless you ask, you won't know what kind of info they need, what kind of barriers they're encountering, who are they listening to, how are they making their decision? Are you open to hearing our perspective? You can just even ask that. And that will get so much. Who's going to say no? No one says no to that.
Like you were saying, I love this. If you are going into funding meetings, and quite frankly, at this point, I don't care who with, and you're falling all over yourself to explain why your mission is so great and why they have to understand everything from A to Z about what you do, that you're just lacking basic social skills at that point. It really needs to be an exercise of listening to truly be curious about why that funder took the meeting, why that legislator took the meeting in the first place, and what they were hoping to learn or hear in the process. You're not out there to convince people to care. You've got your you got to magnify your mission. You got to get your magnifying glass out and figure out what's going on here.
Well, and I have too many meetings to count where I was like, I hope to God they don't ask me, A, how my boss is going to vote on this or how he's feeling. So I would just let them talk. I would just like let them talk for 25 minutes and just ask questions and be really curious. And the meeting would end and they'd walk away. I'd be like, glad I didn't have to tell them the real story on that because they never, not that I was going to hide anything, but they never asked.
So let's talk about this. This is like this flow, right? Is then what's the call to action and the next steps? You go into these meetings. I'm working with an organization, Neighborhood North Children's Museum, awesome organization in a community that's really going to benefit from having that innovative learning experience. And government funding is necessary for their capital project. And it's really just, how do you set a meeting? How do you go into a meeting? How do you follow up with a meeting? And I will agree that the missing link is often, why'd you have the meeting in the first place? Why? What is it you want to come out of it? And please do not give me it was just a nice meeting. I just wanted to let them get to know me. You're not respecting their time. And you run the risk of really making somebody angry with that kind of laid back. I'm just here hanging out approach. You're not impressing anybody with that.
No.
Know why you're there. Be ready to make the ask at any point. And it might be as simple as, can we add you to the database? Can you attend this event? Can you tell me what you plan to do or how you feel about this piece of legislation? I'm open to being flexible with that. What that call to action is. Can you help us with the cap grant? Where in the government is money for this kind of thing? Like those are all reasonable calls to actions and questions. What's not reasonable is, we just want to talk with you and throw up on you about how great we are for 20 minutes and then with no clarity of what we're going to do next together. You'll look like a rookie. You'll look like a rookie.
No, most definitely. And then another when you ask those questions, and it's specifically, so can we count on you to support this issue? One of the keys I say is just be silent for like 30 seconds and stare at them. It's going to be real uncomfortable. We're all going to feel really uncomfortable, but they're eventually going to say something. And I know it's hard. I'm hard. I like to feel silence myself, or if they're already supporting it, that's another thing. Thank them and say, who else do we need? Especially at the federal level, but at the state level too, they all have alliances and allegiances and like, is there anyone else that you can talk to about this? Can we count on your support to help build the support in this committee or legislative body or whatever it is?
Yeah. It's interesting. I work with government entities, not so much in advocating for policy, but in revenue. And everyone always wants the big government grant, which is not my area of expertise, thank God. But I can find money in government. I mean, there's money in government, right? There's lots of money in government. And it's through relationships where you find out who else cares about this and where those crannies of dollars are, whether it's through the Department of Agriculture or, what we used to call walking around money. I don't know what we call it anymore, but I'm pretty sure it's still there. So, lots of good things, but you have to listen to learn. You have to be confident in your position at the table in order to really actively listen, because otherwise you're in your own head worrying about, do you belong there? And how to care, which is not fun to do.
Yeah, and don't worry about being asked questions. This is another thing. I have a whole slide that I say about things to avoid. Like I say, don't lie. I don't say that because people go into meetings like intending to lie to lawmakers. But when a lawmaker or staff typically ask you a specific question, you may not know the answer. And especially when I train like citizen advocates, like you're there to tell your story. You're not the lobbyist. You're not the policy expert. And sometimes even me, I don't know everything about everything. It's okay to say, I don't know. Let me get back to you. But then really get back to them. Because this is the thing, especially when you're meeting with busy lawmakers, they're just going to go on to they're meeting with 10 more people after you. You think they're going to remember to come to you and ask you? No. And unfortunately, the squeaky wheel does get the oil when it comes to these things. I don't say to be annoying, but be persistent.
Don't
follow up.
Yeah.
Don't disappear. Follow up in regular intervals when it makes sense, and follow up around times that make sense. That's one of my other tips for folks, especially when I do like citizen advocacy trainings, is timing is so important. So I tell folks like, okay, I hope you're like so engaged and empowered and want to like contact your lawmakers today. Well, specifically, most of the state legislatures, they're not even in session. So today might not be the best day to contact them. But that's why it's so important to connect with an organization, which I hope your organizations are doing, to find out when the timing is right. But yeah, lawmakers only have a very short time frame. Is your bill coming up? Is it they're only thinking about what happened last week, maybe, or what's happening next week and the week after? Is your bill coming up next week or the week after? That's the optimal time to be talking to them about it. But not necessarily the optimal time, but just be reminding them. Hopefully you've built that relationship. So you can call and be like, hey, this reauthorization that was up, or this bill is up, you know, Jack, or whatever. And so I want you to know I'm here as a resource. You know how we feel about this bill. We'd love for your. Something happened.
We're back now. Sorry.
I don't know what happened.
On my end. Sorry. So that you're kind of that point of contact that they can, and again, I include this on the strategic plan, that you are the first point of contact that state legislatures reach out to on. I mean, you know where we saw this was in childcare during COVID, for universal early education and preschool childcare was available. I mean, how many early education organizations do you know out there who have struggled for decades, who had some real attention and opportunity? And we missed the boat on that. But universal pre-K would have been a game changer for hundreds and hundreds of nonprofit organizations and the country, in my opinion. That part's my opinion.
Yes.
But, you know, we just didn't have that, obviously, that voice or that leverage. Could get that one through, but now we know it's on the table. We know it has shape to it. So these are all examples of, if you're trying to figure out how to do, you know, a $20,000 fundraiser for the end of year appeal campaign, that's important. I get it. We have to run our campaigns, but we have to do them simply so that we really spend our energy on the power moves, which is how do we get a louder voice? How do we use these folks and these passions to influence corporate donors and government donors? That's really what it is. You're passing legislation. I'm raising money from government. And of course, there's a bit of crossover in all of that. But getting elected officials on your team really strengthens it.
Absolutely.
And power comes from the people in your database. I'm going to be that specific because if they're not in your database, it's a little bit hard to call them yours.
Absolutely. And I think another pitfall that my clients come to me a lot on, and so I work with a lot of I'm very niche. I work with state-based, usually membership organizations that have some kind of focus on health and human services. So think like public health associations, like Head Start, California is one of my clients, community clinic associations. Because why I like associations is usually their number one like charge is to do advocacy, like that's their thing. And they have access to people. But one of the pitfalls they come to me on, oftentimes, because I do health and human services. So if they're a healthcare organization, they're like, how do we engage our patients in our advocacy? And I say, well, have you engaged your CFO? Have you engaged your staff? Does your board of directors know that you're doing advocacy? Because I call it circles of engagement. If you don't start in the center and get those people on board, when you try to expand and try to go to patients or people with lived experience, if the rest of your organization doesn't know what you're talking about, why should they? And why would they? And how are you going to like successfully engage them in advocacy? So a lot of my clients struggle with just like, oh my God, we could do this and this and this. And I create this thing called an advocacy roadmap where it really lays out, no, in year one, and this is, I can't think of a time I never said this. Not that I had given everyone the same advice, but you got to figure out your internal processes first before you can expand your advocacy program. Again, if your board of directors doesn't know what your legislative agenda is, why should anyone else care outside of those walls?
Yeah. It really is the most important thing your board can do is set that strategic direction. That should
Yes.
all be decided and fleshed out through a strategic planning process and then executed accordingly.
Yes. And then
Yeah.
if you, I also talk about a culture of advocacy within your organization. We hear this a lot, culture of fundraising, but if you don't make space and time for advocacy, it's not going to get done. If you don't, because a lot of organizations don't have, like, if you, even if you have one person dedicated to advocacy, like I was at the Heart Association, we had a couple people, I still needed to work with the fundraisers. I still needed to work with those Heart Walk folks. And I needed them to know, it's not just for me, like this is going to help them. So how do you need to create space and time and priority for your staff to engage if that's going to be one of your priorities.
Bethany, I think there's so much gold in here, and I love the idea of the roadmap to help keep it organized because
Yes.
you can't just, have short attention spans out there.
Yes.
Social movements and social change, as we know, take consistent attention and effort long term. It takes clear, compelling messaging. That is the focus of the board of directors. They can write you a check for $100 or $10,000. That's not going to save you. That's not enough. They need to drive the plan and create the culture of success. And advocacy is part of it. If you're not clear on what system you're disrupting, the programs and services you're giving, you're leaving money on the table. You're leaving partnerships on the table, which gives you access to bigger and new groups of people who care directly and indirectly. But I like what you're saying. You got to kind of first focus on those internal processes, get clear on what the goals are, what the activities are going to be, how people are going to engage. Then you're ready to make new friends.
Exactly. I call it getting your house in order before you invite people over.
Yeah, for sure. Getting your house in order before inviting people over. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, because they're going to want to be more involved unless they come over and they just see like.
They're going to see those dust bunnies in the corner. Like, I don't always care about it, but if I'm trying to raise money, I want to straighten up a little bit more. That's all.
Yes, yes. I think another thing that my clients also struggle with, so there's a lot of advocacy software out there, advocacy tools that help connect people to their lawmakers. And so I hear, do we have to use one of those? So I know I have an answer that people don't like to hear, but I will say if you're going to do wide scale, serious advocacy, you do need an advocacy tool. It's kind of like saying you want to start a nonprofit, but you refuse to use email. Well, are you going to just call everyone? Are you going to do,
I have to do everything face to face.
Yeah, or like
Pigeon, build a movement all face to face.
Pigeon Messenger or whatever. Yeah. You just can't, this is like, that's not even expected anymore, right? You need to have email. And it's the same as with advocacy. And so then the second question I get is, our lawmakers hate form letters? It actually turns them off. They actually ask us not to send them. So what I say about that is, well, I also hear lawmakers say they don't want to talk to their constituents, which I'm like, well, then you should have a different job. Then you should
do it.
Christian. Because if you don't like talking to people, your people, they should not be in this job. That's just like part of the job. But you don't have to necessarily use, so I think you can use advocacy software. It doesn't have to be a sledgehammer. It can be a scalpel. You can use it in very strategic ways. But the number one reason people do not call their lawmakers or do not engage is because they don't know their contact information. Yep. That is the number one reason. Even me, I even know who my lawmakers are. Did I memorize their phone number? Do I know their email addresses? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on the year, if I put them in my phone contacts. Even if you send me an advocacy alert that I am so passionate about, if you make me click on a legislative link to go find I will just delete it.
That's true in everything. We have to make the next step so stinking simple for people. That's our job, is just make it really smooth and inspire them to take the step. Yep.
And the advocacy software nowadays, you can have, obviously people can write their own stories in there. You can have carousel letters, there's ways to go around that. But another way, what I think there is so important is once you upload your whole email list or your donor list, you can see where your centers of power are or where they aren't.
Yeah.
So I think that is one of the greatest values of advocacy software, is you can see, okay, a lot of like I've lived in Minnesota and Iowa and California. Many of the chairs of the Health and Human Services Committee, or the committees that my clients care about, are not from the rural area, are not from the urban centers. They're from the rural areas. Do you know if you have people there?
Yeah.
How do you know? Unless you put it into a system and you can see it laid out on a map. So, and then how do you know if you need to build power? Then it just directs so much. Oh my gosh, we have no one in Senator Thompson's district. And he's the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. We better start finding people in that area. Or who do we know? It just
Or do an
totally.
event there or host something.
Yes, exactly. You just can't be doing advocacy blind. And I think by not using advocacy software, and I don't work for any, I have favorites and not favorites, and I do this kind of work for my clients where I do analysis and help them figure out one. But it just really is key
Those
to
are
the
types of
process.
investments, infrastructure investments that can be a little bit tough to swallow sometimes, but it's that data that gives you the path to cutting the busy work, right?
Yes,
Instead of adding
yes,
one more fundraiser, one more set of meetings, or
yes,
it really will say, is this working? Is this the right
yes,
approach? Was our assumption correct here? You've got to have
yeah.
to measure it.
And then also sending out action alerts to all your whole list every single time, all the time. No, people, what it will do is they will just like ignore when you really need them because they're like, well, they just sent me this before. And if you don't have advocacy software, it's hard to say we need this. This is in the Health and Human Services Committee. I just use that because that's a lot of the committees I work in. Just send it to people in that district. Reach
Yeah.
out to them before legislative session. Say, do you know how important you are? Your lawmaker is the chair of this committee. That means you'll be hearing from us a lot. But that also means that you have so much power to help us meet our mission.
Wow.
Yes. It seems so obvious to me, but hardly people do it. Just
But
tell them, give them a heads up, give them special training.
And this doesn't
Yeah.
mean you have to become a news junkie or know everything about
No.
politics or understand every policy
Mm-mm.
component. You have to know what really pisses you off about how the system is created
Yes.
and what change you likely know that needs to be made more than anybody because you're uniquely positioned as a leader in that industry. So working with somebody like Bethany really helps
Mhm.
you pinpoint the messaging, pinpoint the issues without getting overwhelmed, and
Mhm.
without turning yourself into a legal or political organization. That's not
No,
what we're suggesting,
no,
but it is about owning your power, and your power is in leveraging the voice of people who want to see that big vision happen, your big,
absolutely.
bold change that you want to see in the world, not just your programs and problems,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
I like to say sometimes take
Mhm.
our energy in the fundraising world. But if you can talk about programs and problems and the change you're making in the world in the greater sense, you've got a very robust message, which means it's rooted in a strategy, a strategic
Mhm.
roadmap. That's when people feel confidence, and that's when people start giving more money with more ease. And that's what
Absolutely.
that's what we want.
Absolutely. Just a couple, I know we're coming towards the end of our time, but a couple other pitfalls I see as I want to just name two more that are pretty common. One is when I ask to see organizations' legislative agenda and it has like 10 to 13 things on it. I'm like, is this just like, I don't understand what this is. Is this, you need to, now you can have that many, but if you're out, what you're talking about outwardly, some things don't require grassroots or grass tops. I mean, it's like internal regulation, blah, 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 like, right. But when you're talking about advocacy, pick two, maybe three things that you're going to focus on, right? What are the two things that you want to focus on where you want to engage a greater bit of people in your organization? So that's number two, number whatever I've said.
Beginning focus. Okay.
Yes. So yes, two or three. And then also have a way that you're going to determine when people ask you to jump on. How do you have a rubric on how you make a decision on what jumps? Maybe there are things in like category two that if they become politically feasible, they might jump to category one. I don't know, but you need to be prepared for those things and be talking about them.
Yeah.
But the third thing, or maybe the seventh thing I'd like to talk about, I don't know where I'm at, is lobbyists. And many organizations have a lobbyist. You might think we need a lobbyist. And I do my best work with an awesome lobbyist. I am not a lobbyist. I see that lobbyists, the distinction between me and a lobbyist is a very tactical job. Their job is to get a bill from one step to the next, right? Very tactical, very linear. My job is to help you build power in your organization. When you say it like that, that's two very different ways of looking at things. Oftentimes I see organizations fall into the trap of having a very lobbyist focused advocacy program where it's really focused on their relationship, their gatekeeping with the lawmaker. They're not thinking about, sometimes they are, and they'll tell you they are. They might be thinking about how can we build power, but they're not going to do it. they have like 16 other clients, or maybe they just have you, but
Wow.
they're inside talking to the lawmakers every day. They're not thinking, do they have advocacy software that tells me? I mean, I hope the good ones are, and then they ask me, and they, but where do we have power? Where do we need to build power? They're thinking about, how do I get this bill through the Senate Health and Human Services Committee, and then how do I get it off the floor, and then how do I get it out of the House committee, right? It's a very different approach to advocacy, and I feel like sometimes organizations like, oh, we have a lobbyist, so we're done. We got our advocacy plan settled. That's just
Yeah,
one piece.
where lobbying can be a one-person show, really, right? It can be a team or one-person show. I think
Yeah.
advocacy brings in, tell me if you agree with this, it's sort of that public relations arm to it,
Yes. Yeah.
that community organizing arm to it. Yeah,
Another way.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, say another way I say it is, you're only as successful inside the Capitol as powerful as you are outside the Capitol.
No doubt about that.
And so you help by focusing on the outside the Capitol power. You're helping your lobbyists be more successful. They only can pull so many strings and levers. If the lawmakers don't feel pressure outside the Capitol or in their communities to do what you want, they're not going to do it.
Yeah. I mean, it's their job. Like, it's save the judgment for what drinks at night at home.
Yes.
It's just, there's no room for it. Like, you're not this righteous police. It's you have to assess what's happening and really play it smart to save your sanity, and remember you're running a long game on this.
Yes.
And I think that's important, is you don't get a meeting next week and money in 3 weeks, right? It might take you 8 weeks to get the meeting. I mean, you probably much better than I am at it, but it can take a minute to get the meeting, and that's okay, because you're in it for the long haul. So don't yourself. Know when your season of meetings are, based on appropriate timing, as you had said. And, don't overwhelm the system, but make sure you build in advocacy steps, whether they're small improvements or major quantum leaps in your advocacy. Make sure your strategic plan has advocacy, and your board is engaged in developing the plan around it.
Absolutely. Just something like, I think you're absolutely right. It doesn't have to be your main initiative, but make sure it's just on your radar, so you don't get caught off guard. And so you can leverage those opportunities when they come available.
Yeah, because at the very least, your job is to educate your database or your community of people on issues, the pressing issues that your constituents are dealing with. So that simple step of educating, which I'll be honest, some nonprofits aren't even doing that. It's, here's the next fundraiser, here's the schedule of events coming up, and that's their messaging strategy. But a robust messaging strategy with story arcs is educating them on that systems change. That's advocacy. Bethany's here to help you take that, first step much further. And Bethany, I'm just so excited that you're in my orbit, that I get to enjoy your work. I follow you very closely, and just appreciate how accessible you make advocacy for clients are. That's a unique component of my mission, is that focus on community building. So we're going to have lots of fun together coming up, I think.
Oh, I hope so. And I love that accessibility piece, because I think that's something else people think, it's something over there, I can't do it. We elect these people we elect them, we hire and fire them through elections, and we pay their salaries through taxes. We are their bosses, and we need to show up and give them feedback. Right? Give them performance reviews.
Yes. I always dream of like a job description. I think, like, what is it? Like, can't lift over 50 pounds to be a state senator. Like, somebody write a basic job description, because nobody seems to know what it is. But it is to represent the people in their districts, and then to return your phone call. So have fun with it. Have fun with it. Bethany, thanks so much for being here. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Drop your questions. Let us know what your comfort level is with advocacy, if you're doing advocacy now, or if you're looking to include more advocacy into your strategy that makes everything else easier, including your fundraising. Because remember, while changing the world is hard, fundraising doesn't have to be. Thanks for being here, Bethany. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.